You've coached a lot of good tight ends here. You've had Dwayne Allen, Brandon Ford. Can Jordan kind of ascend into that?
I think Jordan can definitely do that. I think a couple things about Jordan. I think it's been fun to watch or coach him and watch him mature and turn into one of our better leaders from as far as he's come from as a freshman to now. And his decision to come back as a senior and has really worked hard, and hopefully the benefits will show up on the field this fall.
We've heard about Lazy Leggett. We've heard about,
He named himself
he
that.
named himself that, When did you see the light really go on for him?
Probably last summer. For a while he was, it's like all these kids, they come in and the maturity process comes at different levels for them, and then all of a sudden these kids are away from home and how they gravitate, the whole college experience itself. And finally last year he cut the light on that maybe, I could be pretty good at this if I worked at it. And, last year he worked extremely hard in practice, and it showed on Saturday, and, it's pretty evident. And then this summer he's done the same thing, so I was really look forward to watching him play his senior year.
So we know what Leggett can do and what he's been able to show throughout the season, but what about the other tight ends on the depth chart?
That's going to be interesting, simply because there's a group of guys that's working behind him that really need to challenge him in a lot of ways, or either follow suit to him. And then, you talk about Garrett Williams, who came in as a freshman last year and played. And you've got Mylan Richards, ready to see some production out of him. Cannon Smith, who's coming off a shoulder injury this spring, but will be with us by mid-August for sure going. And then DJ Greenlee, who's had a productive last 2 weeks of spring and carried it this summer. So, and then we have a freshman, J.C. Chalk, who'll be interested to see where he fits and all that. And we have a couple other kids. Dan Radakovich's son, Grant, is with us. And then Jesse Fisher's another young man that's in our program. So that collective group of guys, they're fun to coach. They work extremely hard. And we're just excited to see which one's ready to step up and make plays for us on Saturday.
Is there any one of those guys in the group that mentioned that stands out?
They all do certain things pretty good. One of the things about the tight end position in this particular offense is you've got to kind of be versatile in the fact that you've got to be athletic enough to flex out and play as a receiver and stretch the field vertically. And then you've also got to be more blocking oriented from the backfield, which it's a skill, especially when you're a really tall guy like Jordan, who's got to get under people and be a lead blocker at times. And then you have to play an attached tight end, which is attached to the line of scrimmage, and from there. So the job requires a really difficult skill set to master all of them. Some of these kids do a really good job flex, for instance, and when you ask them to be attached, they're maybe not quite as good, or vice versa. And so it kind of takes a while to develop the things that they're not good at, and develop that and attack that.
Speaking of that, Garrett, I was surprised when I was looking back at the stats the other day. Didn't catch a pass last year. Great at blocking. How do you get him more involved in the passing game, or is that even a plan?
Oh, yes, that's a plan for us because, if you don't, you end up getting tendencies on, hey, when he's in there, he's not getting it or whatever, and they can double somebody else. So he's got to develop that skill set, which he's worked extremely hard on. And then you got to have confidence that he's in there and can do it, and then he kind of does it. So I look forward to him having those opportunities this year.
With what the receivers have been able to show what they can do, how do you see yourself utilizing the tight ends with having so much talent there?
Well, probably one of the biggest things is in a lot of the progression reads that quarterback, that Deshaun or our quarterback will go through, the tight end's probably one of the first reads that he has, simply because he's usually closer to him, and he either comes open or doesn't on a lot of different routes. So that's really how his progression usually goes sometimes. And it's not every play, but a majority, a lot of them. And so just guys understanding how to work and get open, and then also being able to get him the ball at that time.
Mylan Richards, one of those guys. I'll look at him. He's looks great coming off of the bus. But, how do you get him to that next level?
That's what I'm charged of doing. And I look forward to working with him this year and him having some success and growing from it and developing and having confidence. Yes, a lot of these kids come in and some kids come in and they think they're world beaters, and all of a sudden it gets tough and it doesn't go their way sometimes, and you got to kind of grind through that. And this year looks to be a good year, hopefully, for Mylan.
What do you want to see out of that group coming into fall camp?
I want to see consistency. I want to see not a drop off behind Leggett. I want to see, a group of guys that really are team oriented. Because that's one thing, you know, you guys, along with everybody else, are sitting there saying, you got this guy, and this guy gets the ball, and that guy gets the ball. But, you know, the bottom line in our offense is we've got to go back, develop the chemistry amongst our offensive unit, in which, you know, Tony and Jeff done a good job, you know, orchestrating that. And then those guys are being effective as a team and being humble and work hard at it.
If you didn't know better, you'd walk up to Cannon Smith out on the football field and think he was a guard.
Oh, yeah.
How does he use that size to his advantage, and
You know,
where do you see him kind of fitting in?
You know, being a physical blocker at the point of attack, we play quite a bit. There's plenty of opportunities for third down opportunities out there. There's third and shorts that you're going to get into the game. There's plenty of opportunities for him to play as you know, in blocking capacities. But then also he's a pretty agile guy. He'll deceive you some for a big guy. He runs fairly decent for a big kid. So he's fairly athletic. He can turn his body and go get it. So hopefully he'll come on this year, and we look forward to good things from him.
So what about special teams? What stands out to you as the biggest improvement after the spring on special teams?
You know, our biggest thing is we've got 6 phases that make up our special teams, and in some of those phases last year we were pretty good. You know, Greg Hugel was pretty good at kicking field goals. We were pretty good at field goal block, and we were middle of the pack in kickoff return. But there's also some glaring areas that we've got to get better at as a collective group and own it. And we've worked really hard this offseason in addressing some of those issues and getting kids on there that not only understand it and realize the impact of the game that it'll take, and then work as a collective body to improve in areas such as kickoff coverage. Our punts have been pretty decent. You know, we've been middle of the pack in punting. But then obviously punt return has been, you know, getting somebody to actually give us a returnable punt has been something that college football has changed probably more so in the last 5 years than anything. You know, I think we had 100, I think my stats were we had 113 potential punt situations where we were returning the ball. And out of those situations, I think we had actually 13 returnable punts that were punted to us. And so you got to go back and you got to look and see, you know, what are we doing, and then what are we doing it with? Are we sound schematically, and then getting the kids to effectively produce on Saturday for you.
I watched a video on Frank Beamer a couple of weeks ago, and he was talking about special teams, and he said sometimes it's as much a want to as it is talent.
Yeah.
So how do you kind of make those two mesh, getting talented kids out there, but the ones that want to go do it?
Yeah, that's something sometimes you don't find out till they're out there, and that's usually too late. You know, sometimes for a young kid to realize, you know, probably didn't play them and didn't have the skill set. Obviously, if you're a returner in high school, you can be, and you're good at it, you've had a skill set that developed it. But I don't know how many of these kids that we sign actually are on their high school kickoff coverage team, you know, or on their high school kickoff return team. And probably one of the hardest skill sets to develop is a frontline kickoff return guy. You know, there's a big difference in a linebacker dropping to a spot to a drop than a kickoff return guy dropping 35 yards and then taking on a guy. So you have to spend time actually teaching technique and developing that, and that doesn't just come overnight sometimes with these kids.
Is there any